A lot of work comp carriers, they want to see that those subs have workman's comp because they don't want to come back and, potentially have to pay out on that claim if that person gets injured. It is really a delicate dance and there's a lot of logistics involved in it, unfortunately. But the stance that a lot of our general contractors take is that they have to have workman's comp if they're going to come on and work on the job site.
Well, very excited for the podcast today. We have Tyler Woodruff on. Welcome, Tyler.
Thank you, Brad. Thanks for having me.
So Tyler, he's been with us at the Coalition Summit, I think, for the last three, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And you've been an incredible resource, not just to me, but so many other builders throughout the country. And you're an executive producer with Woodruff Leavitt, as well as a co-founder and CEO of Midpoint. And maybe we start there, before we get into the insurance, which I think is really important. But walk us through what you're doing at Midpoint.
Yeah. So it was interesting. So while being in insurance, you have a lot of conversations with builders, with general contractors, both in the residential space and commercial space. And while I was trying to go out and what we said, market accounts, I would go to insurance companies and I would say, why don't you want to write this account? I would give a narrative of the business. I could go through all of their, safety manuals, the best case practices, or standard operating procedures, give a whole lot of background on a general contractor. And insurance companies would say, no, we don't want them. And so as I started digging into this problem, both I found out that it was both a problem for general contractors and insurance carriers. And that was essentially proper risk transfer. So risk transfer being understanding your subcontract agreement and what we would call your prime agreement with the client that you're actually building the house for, the project for. We realized that there was no way for insurance carriers to actually know if that risk transfer was being done properly. From a general contractor standpoint, that looks like receiving certificates of insurance,
Mm-hmm.
sending out notifications, when they're about to expire, or kind of, doing your due diligence with that. And what I found out was that was just the tip of the iceberg. And what really needs to happen with proper risk transfer is everything starts with the master subcontract agreement, and then it flows down into your certificate of insurance, and then it flows down into the actual language of the subcontractors that you're using on the project. And there wasn't really a good, solution at the time that we felt that we could own and that we control, that did that risk transfer properly. And so through Midpoint, we've been able to develop a software, deploy it with some of our clients, and be able to do that risk transfer on their behalf.
I love that you gave this breakdown because I was just meeting with a builder a couple of days ago. I gave them your info, Tyler. They're going to be reaching out. It was actually on Friday. Um, Point being is that for us as builders, you know, one of the big misconceptions we have as builders until I've spent time with you and really understood this is we take it for granted that one, we have to make sure that they're pre-qualified. They have, they're insured properly for the work. They have the right, license registration, and they have their, they're with the ROC, at least in Arizona, and that they're licensed to do that work. And that's all fine and dandy, but we don't realize that sometimes they may be bidding work that they're not licensed for, or the bidding
Hmm.
work that they're not insured for more specifically, or, their certificates aren't valid. They're not right. We're not additionally assured. They're not naming us. And the list goes on. And even at the highest level, just collecting COI, certificates of insurance, and tracking that is a pain. And Tyler came to me, I mean, maybe a couple of years ago, and you're like, look, Brad, for this set fee a month, we're going to take all that off your plate. We're going to track all of this stuff to make sure you're insured properly and that all their certs are correct and they're hitting the minimums. But I think most importantly, what I realized is not only the burden and the responsibility that now is executed at a high level and is off my plate, but to your point, which you didn't even speak about, I'm sure you can, is that as you go to market for insurance companies, it's going to give us a more competitive rate, better insurance policy because they know that you're vetting us behind the scenes.
That's correct. And so my thesis was, if it is good for the general contractor, it's good for the insurance company, right?
Mhm.
Because any exposure that you face, just by nature of what insurance is, you're transferring the risk to an insurance company. And so if you're protecting yourself, you're inadvertently protecting them. And so what we're able to do with Midpoint is essentially share that data, with them and say, look, Brad Leavitt with a finer touch construction is doing everything that they need to. They're best in class. Here is the risk transfer. I can take that data, I can show it to them, and they know for a fact that it's being done. Prior to Midpoint, it was very much a manual process. And what that looked like for a general contractor was looking at the certificate of insurance. What if any of the listeners right now, if you pull out a certificate of insurance, you'll see that the very top line says that this is a matter of information only and confers no rights upon the certificate holder. And so, like, when I first read that as an agent, I was like, wait, like, everybody is passing around this document like it's an official, document as if it came from the insurance company, but it didn't. What actually happens on the back end on the insurance side is, so I'm also, an executive producer, but I also have a team behind me. And so my account manager would manually fill out, that certificate of insurance, and then they would send it to whichever party is requesting that. Humans make mistakes. They might check the wrong box and totally misinterpret something. Um, and so what we do for Midpoint is not only are we checking that certificate of insurance, any of those boxes that are checked or anything that is required of your master subcontract agreement, we're also reaching out to the subcontractors, to send to us so that we can double check them. Because we don't want to just take an agent's word for it or their account manager's word for it. We want to see that it is in their policy. So when a claim arises, we have all that documentation. We can send it to that subcontractor's insurance company and say, here's the risk transfer. Here's all the documentation. This is the claim that happened. Essentially, take care of it more or less. And so that's what we've been able to accomplish with Midpoint. And kind of what you were touching on is by being able to do this and really transferring the risk back to the subcontractors on a lot of the clients that we have with Midpoint, we've been able to lower their premiums by showing that data to the insurance carriers.
Maybe from a rough guess percentage, as you've been going through with Midpoint and really doing these inspections yourself, what are you seeing and finding from either gaps of coverage, maybe not naming us additional insured? I mean, what are some of the, I don't want to say loopholes, but scope gaps that you're finding?
Yeah, no, excellent question. So I would say just like surface level, like when we take on a new client, let's say they have 100 subcontractors that they're working with. On average, two to three, we'll say 3 to 5 of those are in total compliance with the master subcontract agreement. So
So
out of 100,
three to
3 to 5 are compliant.
maybe
Now that
5%. Yeah.
maybe 5%. So that's a very strict criteria, right? So a lot of our clients, what they'll have is, so, you require general liability, you require workers' comp, you require auto, you might require an umbrella. And within each of these categories of coverages are additional insured or additional wording that your master subcontractor contract agreement may have. But as a builder, you're not enforcing, but it's that written language that is really going to protect you. So whenever you see a certificate of insurance, that is what that subcontractor is, giving evidence that they have, right?
Mhm.
That doesn't necessarily 100% guarantee that that is transferred to you as a general contractor, even though your name is listed at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
So what we want to see is if they have general liability and your master subcontract agreement requires it, we want to see that they have ongoing operations. So if they've added a finer touch as additional insured for ongoing operations, same thing for product completed ops. A lot of the times, one of the big coverage gaps that we'll see is subcontractors will send in a certificate and it doesn't have product completed ops coverage for the builder. Now, Tyler, what is product completed ops? In Arizona, we have a statute of limitations, which is 8+1, or statute of repose of 9 years, right? That essentially you have this tail as a builder that a homeowner can come back and sue you for construction defect. What product completed ops does is that is what would be triggered if a general contractor were to be sued by their client. It's not ongoing operations, it's product completed ops because the work is done. You're kind of in that tail area, and that's what would come back to protect you. If they only have additional insured for ongoing operations, that's only while the project is ongoing and the subcontractors are on the job site. And so that's a huge gap that we see. Another one is waiver of subrogation for workman's comp.
Mm-hmm.
to where if you're requiring a waiver of subrogation, and a lot of the general contractors, especially to like when an audit comes around, you're going to want to make sure that you understand how the audit is going to be conducted by the workers' comp carrier. Sometimes they will require that you know, have waiver of subrogation for all of your subs. And the reason why is, let's say you have a subcontractor, they come onto your job site and they get injured, right? If you're like a commercial GC, sometimes they'll put up the scaffolding. Um, and there's a myriad of other things that could have happened. But if they get injured and the work comp carrier of the subcontractor comes back and says, Brad, a finer touch construction is, 15, 25% negligent in this. Let's say it's a $100,000 claim. You might have to pay out, through them suing your insurance carrier, up to, in that case, $15 to $25,000. A waiver of subrogation prevents the subcontractor's work comp carrier from coming after you as the general contractor. So there's a lot of wording that you would want to check that the subcontractor would submit. And a lot of that is going to be dictated and predicated upon the master subcontract agreement that you sign with them. And this is a huge point too to point out, is that without that language in your master subcontract agreement, technically, by the verbiage of your subcontractor's wording in their policy, their carrier is not obligated to pay out. The reason
Hmm.
why is because within insurance, you have two different types of forms that it could be written on. It could be a blanket form, or it could be a scheduled form. What that looks like is that if I was a subcontractor and I was coming in to do work for a finer touch construction, if it was a scheduled form, I would request that form. Midpoint would request that form. And then we'd look in these boxes and we would see that a finer touch is specifically listed in the box, and the project is also most likely specifically listed within the box. That is a scheduled endorsement. Now, if they have a blanket endorsement, what that wording looks like is as per written contract or as per written agreement. So if there's no agreement in place, right? Let's say that you're a general contractor and you're really bad at having your subs sign these agreements. The first thing that I would say, as far as a massive coverage gap, is make sure every subcontractor is signing this master subcontract agreement. Otherwise, you're going to have massive gaps because of how your subcontractors' insurance policies are actually worded.
It's amazing how tricky it is and how it's easy where, as I think about this, as you're going through this, Tyler, and you brought up the master subcontract a few times. I mean, I think at its core level, I think there's very few builders, and maybe you speak to this, that even have a master subcontract with their
Mhm.
subcontractors. They're not contracting everyone. Maybe they're signing their invoices. Maybe there's two parts of this question. Is one, how many builders that you're working with are actually contracting all of their trade partners and subs? And number two, when they are, you know, I would imagine from what it sounds like, especially with, what you're doing at Midpoint, I mean, you have to understand what the verbiage and language that's in the master contract.
That's correct. That is correct. So with Midpoint, what we do, and maybe at another time we can give the listeners a demo, or if they want to reach out, I can give them a demo. But
Hmm.
what we essentially do is, let's say with a finer touch construction, any requirements that you have are going to be predicated upon the master subcontract agreement that you've given to a lawyer. They've signed off on it. And then what we do for Midpoint is we go down to the insurance section, and our system through OCR and AI reads that whole section. So it pulls out the coverage, it pulls out the limits, it pulls out any additional wording, and it makes essentially what we call a risk template. And so any subcontract documents that are being uploaded into our system, our AI system that we've built from the ground up is reading those documents and matching them against the subcontract agreement that they've signed. So we know that, okay, a master subcontract agreement has been signed, and now all the documentation that they're sending in, it matches it. If not, we'll let them know what they're deficient in. And if there kind of comes an impasse to where they're like, hey, like, go pound sand, we're not going to get an umbrella, then we'll let our client, the general contractor, know. When it comes to my clients, and how many of them are using written subcontract agreements, I would say now all of them.
Hmm.
Um, Sometimes when we come in and we're getting a new client, if they make mention that they're not using one, a lot of this is just an education process, right? Of, this is what you need to be doing, and then this is why. This is the amount of exposure that you're actually taking on by not doing this. And within a few weeks, they've reached out to a lawyer, they've gotten an MSA in place, and they're having their subcontractor sign it. I will say, um, when it comes to residential, it seems like it is a little bit more of like the Wild West when it comes to written agreements and everything else. But on
Right.
the commercial side, if anyone has worked with a large commercial, builder, it like they have full teams for a
Oh
project
yeah.
that are
Yeah.
going through, subcontract agreements, and they're going through policy forms and everything else, to where if even if their COI expires while they're on the job, they won't let them on the job, or they won't, give payment once the work is complete. Um, and so those are features that we want to bring to the residential side in the future, to where they have the ability to do that. Um, but it's, yeah, now for insurance purposes and for, contracts, we essentially tell all of our clients that you have to do this. Otherwise, you're putting your business at, big risk. So,
Now, now, as you think about how this continues on, right? And again, this isn't a scare tactic. It's just the reality of us as builders have to be aware of, we're managing risk. That's all we're doing.
exactly.
We're
Yeah.
I'm managing risk when I price a house, when I bid a house, job site safety, and then more importantly, the back end paperwork side. But I know workers' comp exposure. You think about 1099 classifications. I think this is something that I don't think I was aware of, and until working with you, that I could be liable for subs under workers' comp, even if they carry their own policies because of 1099. Like, what's something we should look out, because at the end of the day, we're not inspecting every aspect of our subcontractor's business, and that's why we need midpoint. So,
That's correct. And so it's a really weird subject in Arizona, because um, you have the Arizona Industrial Commission that has essentially a page on their website that allows sole proprietorships and LLCs to sign that waiver and waive their right to workman's comp. And then you also have to look at the legal definition of what is truly a sole proprietorship and what really is a single member LLC, right? For somebody running their business on their own. They take the trash out themselves, they're doing the bidding, they're on the job site doing all the work. Um, and so insurance companies, a lot of them have kind of come out saying, look, we're not going to accept the waiver by the Arizona Industrial Commission, because we don't know for sure if they are truly a sole proprietorship or not. Um, there are some work comp carriers that have their own waiver that you could send to a subcontractor. If they're truly a sole proprietorship, they can sign it and they waive it. But a lot of work comp carriers, they want to see that those subs have workman's comp, because they don't want to come back and potentially have to pay out on that claim if that person gets injured. So it is really a delicate dance, and there's a lot of logistics involved in it, unfortunately. But what a lot of the stance that a lot of our general contractors take is that they have to have workman's comp if they're going to come on and work on the job site.
what as you look at contractual risk transfer mistakes, because you've been speaking about the risk transfer and really what we need to be looking at, missing indemnification. Um,
Yep,
walk through the importance of that and how that protects me, for example, as a GC.
correct. Good question. So I would say when it comes to general liability, um, a lot of my clients, they will have, first and foremost, they'll have additional insured for ongoing operations and product completed operations. And that's written in their MSA that the subcontractor, when they sign it, they have to name us, the GC, as additional insured for ongoing and product completed ops. And you have to specifically request that within your MSA. They'll also include primary and non contributory. Primary meaning that if there is a claim, that the subcontractor's insurance policy is going to respond first. Non-primary, meaning that the general contractor's policy doesn't have to add in addition to those limits.
Hmm.
Um, some of them will also require a 30-day notice of cancellation. So if they're on the job site, and how this kind of came to be and why general contractors will request it is because if they're required to, let's say, get an umbrella coverage, right, in order to do a massive project, a signature project for a GC, they'll go out, they'll get the policy, they'll show evidence that they have the coverage, and then they'll quickly cancel the policy because they don't want to pay, the extra money for insurance. And then, so general contractors have said, well, if a policy gets canceled, we want to be notified 30 days prior to it actually going to cancellation.
Hmm.
So that's another thing that general contractors have been requesting, is because they want to know when policies are actually expiring due to cancellation for the subs that they're using. Um, for workman's comp, like I said, waiver of subrogation. Another one is auto liability. So if somebody is on their job site and they're driving around, these big residential projects or commercial projects, if they hit something with their vehicle, that's not covered under general liability. That's covered under auto liability. So making sure, like, and if they hit a person, heaven forbid, or if they hit the building, and if somebody wants to sue the GC, because anytime a claim happens, lawyers come in if there's going to be a suit, and they're just going to sue everybody, right? And so you want to make sure that your subcontractors have your firm listed as additional insured. You can also have primary non-contributory wording in there, and waiver of subrogation too. So you can include all of these, um, and it will help protect you, but you have to specifically word it within your MSA, because again, a lot of the verbiage within your subcontractors' insurance policies are as per written contract. And if they're not, the manual way of doing it is having somebody within your firm taking in all this documentation and physically checking to make sure that the firm name and the project address is listed on the documents. So logistically, you can kind of see like how big of a pain it is. And that, and when I started realizing this too, and actually like going into the forums of subcontractors and reading everything, and then finding out, there's over 3,000 property and casualty carriers, and not all of them use standardized forms. Some of them have proprietary forms. So now you have to look through all those proprietary forms. And so from a logistics view, a firm would have to have a full-time employee doing this, to,
Right.
to truly do it correctly, right? And then that's not even to go in to say, okay, well, now we have all of the forms and endorsements of the policy. Now we want to see what their exclusions are. Do they have a residential exclusion? Do they have a classification exclusion? You may have hired somebody, right, to let's say do flooring, right? But they actually don't have that within their policy. Maybe they have some interior decorating class code. And when they do something wrong with the tile and you have a construction defect claim, the insurance company comes back and says, hey, they weren't rated for that within their policy, so we're going to deny the claim. Right. And so there's so many more layers to kind of peel back. It's like a massive onion. And really it would be really difficult on top of, managing a construction firm to now manage all of the insurance. It's really truly is a full-time job.
No, and that's what I want to ask you. Just I understand the thought process behind Midpoint and really how it's evolved to this point. But as I think about just for me individually, the amount of work it takes to manage the insurance, like it's cumbersome. You're going through a few examples here, Tyler, of many. How have you created efficiency in the company? And I don't know how much crossover there is. Like, for example, if I'm using Framer A and he
Hmm.
works for me and my competitors, is it pretty similar? So you've already vetted this guy. So as you vet these trade partners, subcontractors, makes it easier as you've built your GC database that you work for. But how difficult is for you to create a system and organization to find this and vet this? And there's so many different layers and it's so time consuming that how can you be efficient as a business is really what I'm asking,
Yep.
to manage so many different GCs and make sure they're all compliant.
Yeah. No, great question. And so I had the idea from Midpoint years ago. And what actually made me pull the trigger on it to actually pursue this and put money behind it and work, because it's a full-time job outside of my insurance career. And they do cross paths every day. But it was really going to the CCS, Contractors Coalition Summit, and seeing all these builders like building things, and going out to my clients' job sites and really miss building something besides an insurance program and insurance policy. And so um, I kind of mirrored it after what I see in the general contracting space. I'm not a technical person. I don't know how to code. My background is finance through school. Um, and so I kind of had a blueprint of what I wanted it to do. I found a designer. We made a whole bunch of schematics and everything on what we wanted the software to look like. And then I was introduced to my co-founder, which is a really cool story in and of itself. Um, and he was a technical co-founder. And so through working with him, he's had a whole bunch of startups in Silicon Valley. Um, and so working with him, we were able to build Midpoint. And so the software itself, we give a demo to kind of show our clients what we're doing, but it's not technically a software for general contractors. It's a software for us,
Mhm.
the people doing it on the back end. Because to answer your point is we can't do it. If it was just a manual process, we we would drown with all of the work because there's too much. So now what we're doing with our system is there's a few technologies that we're utilizing. So we utilize OCR, which is essentially you can kind of think of like eyes for a software program, and AI. So we built out our own AI engine. We're also utilizing a little bit of Claude as well, and we have uh, workflows and everything that we have coded into our system to where if a subcontractor uploads documents, our AI engine is automatically sifting through that data.
Hmm.
And obviously on the back end, it knows the subcontract agreement for this general contractor. And as they upload the information, it's reading through it, it's interpreting what it's saying, and then it's starting to parse all the data.
Hmm.
As it parses that data, it's understanding if, okay, is this ongoing operations for general liability? Is this product completed ops? And then it's sorting it, and then it's putting in a way that we can, make sure that it's correct or not. It kind of serves up tasks to us at Midpoint because this is a service that we do for you. And once it is done going through all the documentation, we have an interface where it kind of lists out all the requirements for the subcontract agreement, and it'll let us know that this matches, this doesn't match. And after that process is done, we can then send out emails to the subcontractor and their agent saying, this is where you were deficient. Please resubmit this specific documentation. Um, and so, really, the only way that we are able to get a hold of it is essentially laying out all of our workflows, teaching that to our own AI that we have developed, and then utilizing that software to keep track of everything. It's almost like to put it in like a builder's perspective. Imagine if you guys are having to do everything manually right now instead of using Builder Trend. Well, we had to kind of go out and create our own Builder Trend to stay on top of things much better.
Mhm.
And so we have engineers, we have designers, we have a whole team behind it. We have compliance account managers, which will handle general contractors, and that's really how we're staying on top of it by having to create our own software.
Have you received any pushback, as you've tried to, have your clientele and GCs, utilize the service?
Yeah, I think with anything that is new, anything that is kind of like of like change, people naturally have reservations for. But a lot of the times, once we go in and say this is like it's fine if a client doesn't want to use us for that service, right?
Hmm.
It's totally fine. What we do is we'll come in and we'll educate them, saying if you don't want us to do it, totally fine. But this is what you're gonna have to do it properly.
Hmm.
And so there's other software tools out there that kind of help with risk transfer. They don't go as deep as we do, but the benefit of having your agent do this on your behalf is because it's a lever. So we can then take all that data, we can take it in with the narrative that we have of your business of working with, Finer Touch Construction for 5+ years. And then we can say, here's all the information that you've had. Here's a whole bunch of information about the subcontractors where the actual exposure lies. And it's not, necessarily like proprietary information about the subcontractors themselves. It's just about the insurance that they have and that a master subcontract agreement was signed, showing that there is risk transfer higher than 5%, allows us to do a lot more and help lower premiums for our clients. So there is pushback, and I would say not so much of a pushback from general contractors, but there's a larger pushback from subs.
Hmm.
And the reason that is because a lot of the times in the residential space, they haven't really had maybe their GC say, hey, subcontractor X, you need to have a waiver subrogation for workers' comp, or you need to have $1 million umbrella because you're about to go on a $12 million project. They haven't really had that pushback. And
Hmm.
so obviously it's natural for them to push back and say, hey, like I've been working with this GC now for, X amount of years. They've never required this. Why are they doing this now? Um, so it's like, or it's going to cost me an extra X amount of dollars. Or if you want me to get, another waiver subrogation, it's going to be 150 or $250. And so that's where a lot of the pushback is. But once the general contractor understands the actual lift of what we're doing for them, it's really a true partnership. I know I'm in contact with a finer AFT's team weekly, you know,
Mhm.
and so it's really a true partnership to where we help transfer this risk back to the subcontractors. Not because we don't like them, but it's because they're the ones that are actually have the exposure. And a lot of
Mhm.
the times too, we're showing them where they're deficient in their own coverage
Mhm.
because they technically signed a contract. If they don't have it, they might be in breach of contract. And so really it's helping them to understand what they have signed and really the risk that they have by being on a job site.
Well, plus, I mean, they're doing the work, right? I mean, they're the ones at the end
Exactly.
of the day. Yeah, they have to be protected, and they want to as well. As you were sharing that, I was just thinking about maybe the pushback from subs because in general, I mean, the GC, understanding that it's, they and where I'm going is that as a GC, typically, I mean, there are some lump sum, some spec. And so, yeah, raise an insurance premium can affect their bottom line. For
Correct.
cost plus builders, they're going to itemize what their insurance cost is. So, it's not a huge delta. If their insurance goes up, yeah, they want to be competitive in the market, but at the same time, it's not a deal breaker. But for subs, they're not doing cost plus. They're giving you a lump sum. Here's our bid. And so if that insurance premium is a lot higher because the
Hmm.
GC requires it, yeah, that's hitting their bottom line. And so I can imagine there's something that's pushing them back because they're looking at, hey, my insurance premium may double by having to hit the requirements that I never hit before, but I
Yeah.
got away with it.
Yep. Exactly. And like we'll get the pushback too of no other GC in the valley requires
It's
this.
yeah,
And it's
no
like
one's making me do this.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's like, well, like your information just came in on this other GC, like we're gonna now they're gonna have pushback with this GC too. And so it is I understand why they get frustrated, especially because like let's say for instance the biggest one that you're gonna have pushback on is umbrella.
Hmm.
And the reason why is when that subcontractor has exposure, they're not an exclusive subcontractor for a finer touch construction.
Right.
They're working with a lot of GCs in the valley, right? Especially with, the labor shortages and everything else that we have, skilled labor. They're working for a lot of GCs. And so their exposure is a lot more than just what they're doing for AFT. And so when they go out to market, they find an umbrella that is over all of the exposure that they have as a business for those next 12 months during the policy period. And so they might come back and say, Brad, like I can't get this policy. It's 30 grand. And which is true because they can't get an umbrella policy specifically for that project that they're doing for you. It's going to be over all of the exposure that they have. And so I just, a lot of the times with Midpoint, what we do is we tell them to go back, look at their other MSA agreements that they've signed, and a lot of them require umbrella limits. And so by not only getting, in compliance with AFT, you're simultaneously getting, in compliance with a bunch of these other GCs. And for them, I say to, you know, use it as a plus. Like if you're applying for other bids for other GCs in the area, now you can put that you have umbrella limits. And so, um, as far as agents and as Midpoint, we try to help builders identify what good coverage actually looks like, right? If they have umbrella, if they have all these extra things that you're utilizing, prioritize those subcontractors because in the event of a claim, it's that policy that is actually going to protect you. Um, so it's like I said, going back to the beginning, a lot of it is just education for general contractors and for subcontractors because it's what the insurance market is having everyone do. It was always there, um, but I think a change in uh, carrier how they perceive the market now. They don't want to be used as almost like a warranty. I always tell a lot of my clients like I would only turn in that claim if it's catastrophic. If you can eat it and it sucks, but your business will still go on, your day will go on. I would say pay it out, depending upon what the claim is. Um, but don't use it as like a warranty program. So just prioritizing those or subcontractors with good insurance is important. So
We bring up the umbrella and maybe speak to this. I know this is something I don't want to say you've had to educate me, but we've talked through many times on what that right umbrella looks like, based on volume and the homes that we do. Um, Reason being is, for any GC that's working with, some owners reps or very savvy insurance companies for clients, they're going to
Yeah.
require that the builder carries some high limit umbrella policy, right? And there's a cost of that. And then, there's a fine navigation to the builder who's trying to figure out, okay, what should I carry? Because every time I add, another umbrella of 5 million or 10 million, right, adds to the cost. What And again, every builder is going to be doing a different amount of volume, but is
Correct.
there a ratio? Is there a percentage? Like when you're looking at this, Tyler, when you're consulting someone, what do you ask them to look at so that they can have the proper umbrella covering them for insurance?
That's an excellent question. And it kind of goes back to, and we are seeing that more and more to where you'll have a homeowner, they go and get a builder's risk. They don't want to add the builder as an additional insured. And so you're kind
Mhm.
of stuck with, okay, well, I don't necessarily have, there's potentially a gap in coverage. Um, what we'll typically say is 30 to 50% of, maybe the highest value of your home. So, if you're building, $15 million home, I would say minimum that you want is 5 million.
Mhm.
I have other GCs that are going all the way up to 10 because again, you have a tail, right? In Arizona, it's 8+1. Um, and so I would say anywhere from 30 to 50%. And with how litigious everything is going, I would say I would err closer to the 50%, especially when you're building these projects for, massive clients, they have the ability to sue. So
Mhm.
it's you
Right.
you want to be able to have the limits to protect you in the event that you do get sued. And I know that some states are different. I know with Nevada, I think there was a time where they were trying to actually make defense limits inside uh, or outside. I can't remember exactly where, but just I would have all the general contractors review their policies and see how defense costs, if they eat away at the limit. So, for instance, if you have $1 million limit and the defense costs are outside, that means it won't erode away at the 1 million. If they are within, let's say it's a $500,000 claim. Well, if your defense costs are 500,000, you just eaten away at that whole limit for the policy period. So make sure you understand that. Um, but what I'm starting to advise my clients, especially, ones with like really big signature projects, like if they're 15, 20 million plus, we recommend putting them on project specific policy to where that project is on its own policy. It is separate from your master policy for like, let's say a finer touch construction. And that policy will last throughout the statute of repose. So if they come back and they sue it, they are going after that policy, doesn't affect a finer touch. Um, and it's a safer way to kind of silo those one-off really big projects. And so that's what we've started educating and kind of advising our clients to do. Those really big projects, put them on a project specific. If you have, 5 million or less in project value, you could probably get away with it on your master policy.
It's really interesting, and the only reason I want to ask is, I mean, you mentioned maybe 50% is a bare minimum. Again, every time you add to the umbrella, it's going to add cost.
Mhm.
What should a GC be aware of? For example, if I'm doing a home that's 15 million and things could fail, are you by that 50% is the end goal saying, well, it's most likely not going to be the entire home that you have to, be responsible for, maybe maybe a portion of it that's failing. I mean, yeah, there are circumstances, maybe doing a hillside build and the whole thing's failing, and that, that's a whole nother issue. But, through your experience in general, when there are construction defects and you're getting tied into these lawsuits, what is the typical value? Is it, 50% of the home? And that's why you're looking at, that that umbrella should cover up to 50%.
That's correct. So I would say because it's hard, and I would say we have had clients, go through construction defect litigation. I have not had a client have multiple construction defect claims in the same year. Um, so I would say, depending upon what your biggest project is, that's why we kind of err on 50%, just because of
Mm-hmm.
um, just how litigious everything is getting, and the ability for your clients to sue, just because they're more affluent, they have lawyers, they just have the ability to do it, and so right now we kind of stick with that 50%. And that is after, the house is done. Um, and we're worried about construction defect. While it's under construction, it's builder's risk all day. Which is a whole other subject that we've been asked a lot is, okay, do me as a general contractor, do I carry it or do I have my clients carry it? And there's multiple trains of thought, but I would say for a home, for a construction defect, right now, industry standard is probably anywhere from 30 to 50% of the highest value of the home.
Okay, that's super helpful. And that's why, I mean,
Yep.
really what we're looking at, especially for me, is, there's so many different things to balance and manage. And it's like, where do
Yeah.
we stop? And you brought up builder's risk. I think this is something that's really confusing for a lot of builders as well as clients, right? That they have a builder's risk policy. What does, just in general, you know, uh, for a builder, general liability, workers' comp, vehicle, personal injury, as opposed to a builder's risk? What are some of the different scenarios or things that they would cover, in a builder's risk that my insurance is not going to cover for the client?
Correct. So I would say uh, some builders and just people in general, they kind of get confused as to the builder's risk and general liability, how those kind of come together on a project to truly like cover gaps.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can kind of think of a builder's risk policy. In insurance, it is written on an inland marine form or inland marine policy. But for me, how I like to typically think about it is builder's risk is property coverage, more or less, right? And then you have general liability. So for a builder's risk policy, if it's ground up construction, what it's going to do, you have kind of more or less two components to a builder's risk policy. You have hard costs and you have soft costs. Hard costs are all of the tangible things. If you can go in, you can grab the wood, the foundation, anything that can be burned, anything that could be essentially destroyed, that is all in your hard cost limit. Okay. And then you have other things which are soft costs. So that could be having to redraw architectural plans after a claim. That could be interest on a loan if your client has a loan, right? Because even though the house is, burnt down to the ground, they're still going to have to pay the bank for that construction loan. And so that is what soft costs goes towards. Um, General liability for the builder, if somebody comes onto your job site and they slip and fall, and let's say it's a child, they come in because they're playing, they slip and fall, they injure themselves, they might sue the homeowner, they might sue the builder, and that's what your general liability is what's going to respond for that. The builder's risk is only going to respond for the structure. And so now there's always been a debate of, okay, does a GC get it or does the homeowner get it?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say go back to your building contract with the owner and see what that says first. If it says that you're going to get it, then by contract, you have to get it. If the homeowner has to get it, they have to get it, right? Unless you amend your building contract. I always tend to err on the GC getting it um, for a couple reasons. One is the value of that home throughout the whole time of construction, right?
Mm-hmm.
To where you might have like these massive change orders. I've heard of some that are seven figures, and it is not probably, the front of the mind of the homeowner to reach out to their agent and say, hey, like I just made a, $1.2 million change order. We need to increase the value of the builder's risk policy. Um, and so that's really the main one is you understand the true value of the home with the change orders and everything else. And two, that the builder's risk policy has actually been purchased and that it is active. Sometimes we've had builders or homeowners, they'll go out and buy a policy, they have it for the 12 months and then it lapses because, originally the build time of the house was 12 months, but it ended up going on to, 16 or 17 months. Maybe it was a hillside build. And so just for the fact of knowing the true value of the home and knowing that it's actually in place, we just feel like is better risk management than if the homeowner themselves got it on their own. Um, and then just another thing that we've been working on with some of our general contractors is whenever you go into a renovation project, there's two different scenarios. You have the builder's risk for the renovation work that you're doing, but if you have the policy for the work that you're doing, there's still an existing structure, unless you're taking everything down to the studs and rebuilding it, right? So if there's an existing structure, one of the things that we've been doing is reaching out to our clients, the homeowner, and saying a lot of the times what we have found is that if you're vacating the property, if there's significant construction work going on, like you're doing underpinning, you're doing
Mhm.
removing load bearing walls, maybe for some you're just taking the whole roof off. It depends upon the homeowner's policy, but we'll actually go through that policy and look for those exclusions. And if they're in there, we'll let the homeowner know, look, your homeowner's policy is not going to cover the existing structure unless maybe you put a rider on it, or if their insurance company offers that product. But if not, on the commercial side, we can insure the renovation work and we can insure the existing project. So really, it's like a juggling act between us, the GC, and the homeowner to make sure that there are no coverage gaps there.
How does, again, this continues to get tricky, and I'm asking you so many questions, Tyler. As you think about the builder's risk and everything we've been speaking about, but even like other key areas, right, of insurance, whether it be cyber attacks, right,
Yeah,
on your operations, which look, the
yeah,
fact of the matter is I'm a small business, and fortunately I do have like an IT company that's fractional that, we outsource to. But for a while I didn't. And so you think about the risks that's exposed to, like, just cyber issues that are out there. I mean, you think about employment practices. A lot of us are small businesses, so it's not like we have an independent or in-house HR firm that's doing all the hiring and dealing with risk of wrongful termination. What are other things that companies should look out for, and how does insurance play a role, even if we may not have the resources to have IT, to have HR in-house?
yeah. No, excellent question. One of the things that we're seeing is kind of on the rise is you alluded to it. In both cases, one is crime. So we've had a claim probably within the last year and a half, to where a firm sent out payment. They thought it was to a subcontractor and ended up not being the subcontractor. It was about $65,000 of work that they had done. They paid them, and it was a scam artist, and we call it social engineering, where they pretend to be somebody else and ended up going to the wrong person. Luckily, they had crime coverage, or a lot of times you can see this too in a cyber policy, to where if you have a social engineering claim and you send payment to the wrong person, there'll be an investigation by the carrier. But if they find, that yes, it was somebody pretending to be a subcontractor, yes, the firm did send money to them, and they're at a claim of $65,000, they will pay out and make you whole again. So, and that's becoming way more complicated, and they've become way more sophisticated in the way that they're able to do that, especially with AI. Even to the point of calling in saying, "Hey, like, where's my payment?" And it sounds like the person that they were on the phone call with. And what we've seen is that they've actually been in a subcontractor system for a while. They know when they're roundabout when they're supposed to get paid, and then they act as that subcontractor to reach out to the GC. So really, you as a general contractor might have great multi-factor authentication. You can have a whole IT team, but that doesn't necessarily mean that your subs do, right? Um, and so we definitely recommend crime and cyber coverage. And another one is EPLI. EPLI is, let's say it's for your employees. So if you have an employee they want to sue the company for maybe it's sexual harassment, um, maybe there was some jokes that shouldn't have been said, and they want to sue the company, and they're leading wrongful termination. All of these things, right? We're also seeing EPLI claims uh, rise or increase dramatically as well. So that's another thing that we're suggesting a lot of our clients look at, especially too because we've seen it clients with firms, not necessarily with general contracting firms, but maybe like a law firm or an accounting firm. They've been there for 10 years. They get terminated, and then all of a sudden they get a lawsuit 2 to 3 months later for wrongful termination and a list of things that somebody said in the office that was highly offensive to them, and now they're suing. So you can kind of think of EPLI as almost like a prepaid legal. Um, and so those are two coverages that we're not only seeing an increase in, but we're also heavily advising our clients to look at and to get. So, and I also want to preface this, too, by it may sound like I'm saying the sky is falling, you know, everyone is, trying to sue you and everyone's trying to get your money. That's not actually who's supposed to be receiving it, and everything is bad when that's not the case. I hope the listeners know that these are just things to look out for. These are the things that are very real. And really, it just comes back to whatever your risk tolerance is. I have clients that say, Tyler, I don't want an umbrella. And they might be doing, 10 to $15 million worth of work. And okay. Like if you understand the risks, right, and you don't want to transfer that risk and you're okay with taking it on,
Mhm.
fine by me, right? But I feel like it's my duty as an agent to just let people know these are the things that are happening, and there is a way to transfer that risk if you want to.
That's amazing. So what's keeping you up night, Tyler?
What's keeping me up at night?
Yeah. Your stress
Um,
load.
Mine is, well, obviously midpoint,
Hmm.
but really it's just making sure that risk transfer is there because it's not only a problem for general contractors but also for insurance companies because by and large, how I kind of think about it, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, Brad. When I was younger and I had friends whose parents may have owned a general contracting firm or you know knew another client that was in construction. A lot of the time, whenever I thought of a general contractor, I thought of they performed a lot of the work, right, themselves. They had framers or electricians or all these other trades that would go out and do it. And now you fast forward 15, 20 years, and now a lot of the general contractors today, they manage the project. They might have like a carpentry crew or maybe a very specialized trade that they can do in-house. But by and large, a lot of the ones that we work with, they subcontract out a lot of the work. And so with the kind of a change in, business plans, uh, carriers have had to adapt, but the way that they gather that information of the subs has not changed with the times. So that is one of the things that we're trying to do with Midpoint is saying, look, this is a great risk, and we can show you that they're a great risk, and the subs that they're utilizing on these projects are also great. Here's their insurance, right? And so it's allowed us to pull a big lever. So that's the kind of change that we've seen and why we decided to build our own software and add it as another service for our clients.
How does that look? I mean, there's a lot of people I speak with that, they have their company, right? As you do,
Mhm.
you've had your company, you're expert in it, as it's well shown in this podcast. Now you're starting a tech company, in
Yeah.
essence, to solve an issue, which is a great idea. And it's very the entrepreneur, side of that is super captivating. What have you realized the complication and how tough it is, going into the tech side, not only from like putting on your sales hat to sell the product, but the development?
Yeah. So it's been a whirlwind learning about, the technical side. The other day, my co-founder was talking to me about vectors and all these other things on how you can, take data, you can have an equation, you take written text, take it through that, equation, and then it puts it into numbers to where you can reference those numbers. It goes back through the formula and then, transmits it back into text. So you can essentially search things much easier, which is a function that we have to have within our software. So it's been like drinking out of a fire hose. And what I've learned a lot of with building this company is the amount of trust that you have to have in people, right? Because you have this thing that you've been building, you've been, ideating about it for years, and then it's now want to create it, and then you have to trust people to, and trust that they're good at what they tell you they're good at, right?
Mhm.
Because I for you, right? Like if you have an estimator come in, they're like, hey, like I'm a great estimator. You more or less can probably quiz them with a couple questions that you're like, okay, I can kind of more or less tell that they know what they're doing. For me, I had to just full on trust my co-founder that he knew how to code because I told him, I was like, look, if you open up a terminal, you throw in a few lines of code and it pops out a smiley face, like I'm going to be wowed, right? Like this person knows how to code when really that's maybe all they know how to do. So really it's just trusting people and empowering the people that we've hired with Midpoint to go and do what we hired them to do and trust that they know that we're doing. And so for me, it's trust has been a big thing. But luckily, I've been blessed with some good people, and I think that we're building something pretty awesome.
It's amazing. I mean, it's been incredible to watch. I mean, Tyler, you've been, um, when you came onto the scene representing us many years ago, I'll give you some kudos here. Just the amount of knowledge, as I, you know, as big as you are, no matter the size, like we always feel like we're your number one client. I mean, just that ability to connect and really be looking for our best interests and know in so many ways you protected our business. You've consulted us. I mean, you've done some great things for AFT. And again, I know you're representing many of the other builders who have come to the summit. And, I think it's important for those listening how they can find you.
Yeah. So there's a few ways. One, probably the easiest is my email, which is Tyler Tyler hyphen or dash Woodruff Woodruff at Leavitt.com. Leavitt, just like Brad.
Yeah, but we're not
Although there's
related. And for the record, I don't own any of the insurance company. I wish.
exactly, yeah, yeah, unrelated to Brad, but Leavitt is spelled the same way. And there's also Instagram, which we can, probably post on the socials and other things. But I I've worked with clients that, just started out a renovation company and they're just doing a bathroom remodel, all the way up to um, startup companies that are, 3D printing houses with, concrete printers.
Mhm.
So I've done everything in between. If anyone wants to reach out just to kind of ask questions for me to look at their policies, get a demo of Midpoint, whatever it is, I'm happy to share my knowledge with them.
Well, Tyler, you've been incredible. Appreciate you making time for us today.
Thank you, Brad. Thanks for having me.
If you get value from the show, please support us by giving a 5-star rating and review on whatever platform you listen to. And I also have a favor to ask. We've had some incredible guests that come on and share their wisdom, their knowledge about their business. So if you have friends or family members that could benefit from those episodes, please share it with them, as well as any other business owners that you're networking with that could get value from the podcast or certain episodes. Please share those as well. Again, subscribe, make sure you're following. Any questions that you have, topics. We've had listeners reach out about certain guests that we should have on the show. Again, brad.l@aftconstruction.com. Email me for topics to address, guests that we should have on, and even if you think you'd be a great guest for the show. So again, thank you for all your support, and we'll see you next time.